Last week, 21 Pilots released The Contract, the first single off of their upcoming album, Breach, which will release in September. Or is it the first single on their upcoming album, Breach? There has been some debate about where exactly this song will be placed, and since we do not have an official track list yet, it is impossible to say. I myself am inclined to believe that The Contract will be the first song on the album, since the band did say The Contract is the first song on Breach. But, in fairness, it could just be the first song released for this era and placed somewhere else in the track list, perhaps track 4 or something. Certainly that is something which they have done in the past. There is no precedent which says that the first single released for an album cycle has to be the first song on the album. In fact, that has only happened twice before, as far as we know. Vessel, the first single released, was Holding On To You, which was track 2. For Blurry Face, Fairly Local was the first single released. That was track 4. Then for Trench, we had Jumpsuit, track 1. And then Skilled and Icy, Shy Away was track 3, I believe. And then, obviously for Clancy, Overcompensate was the first single and the first track. The Contract, we do not know. From a narrative perspective, it would make sense that it would be track 1 because Paladin Strait was track 13, and The Contract picks up right where Paladin Strait left off. So again, my inclination is to say that The Contract will be track number 1 on Breach. But all that is a bit besides the point for what we are going to do today, which is going through and taking a look at all the hidden clues and references which I found in The Contract. Now, I'm sure there are many others which I've missed. There certainly are quite a number in this video. And there are greater minds than mine who I'm sure have found other things or have linked other visuals and symbols and so on to other parts of the lore that I just completely missed. But this is a comprehensive list of what I found and what I identified as not only linking back to something else which we have seen prior in the lore, or explaining something which we have seen prior in the lore or wondered about previously in the lore, but also just certain things which I think are interesting and important to highlight as well. Starting about 13 seconds into the video, we get this image as he opens his eye in the otherworldly realm to which he is sent by Nico, or Blurry Face. And as we can see, the second he opens his eye, the moment he opens his eye, it has this reddish hue to it. Now it's faint, it's subtle, it's only really in his eye and not in the whites of his eyes at all, but it does harken back to visuals we would see and imagery we saw during the Blurry Face era. First seeing it obviously in Fairly Local, but also in Stressed Out, when Tyler, under the influence and power of Blurry Face, became red-eyed, and it was a very stark visual image during that era, which very much stood out and differentiated those segments from the other parts of those videos or songs in which Tyler was not under the control and possession of Blurry Face. As we learned in Jumpsuit and during the Trench era, Blurry Face gains control and power over Tyler or Clancy by grabbing him by the neck, seizing or smearing him. So it makes sense that in this image, in this part of the video, right after Nico has grabbed Clancy by the neck and seized him and cast him into this otherworldly realm, that his eyes would begin to glow red. And it also makes sense that once we get into the otherworldly realm and he begins to look around, we see that he's surrounded by a bunch of figures with glowing red eyes. And we can see those hordes of glowing-eyed figures here, which is why I think these are supposed to represent the souls of the glorious gone, or other people who are possessed and controlled by the bishops, because their eyes too glow red, just like Tyler's did when he was possessed and controlled by Blurry Face during Blurry Face. And obviously, this image of these glowing eyes is a reference not only to that, but also to the song Glowing Eyes, off of Regional at Best. And the concept of eyes glowing when possessed by the bishops has been confirmed time and again. Like I said, we saw it in Blurry Face, we see it to a lesser degree in Trench, and we see it quite explicitly in Skilled and Icy, when Keon's seizes Trash, and then Clancy seizes Keon's lifeless corpse at the end of the video. As some have pointed out, in those instances, especially during Skilled and Icy, their eyes glowed orange or yellow. And here we see red eyes. But I do think the connection still holds, because again, in Blurry Face we saw red eyes, red glowing eyes. This right here is probably one of my favorite shots from the music video. And I think it is also quite interesting to note and be aware of the fact that here, the torchbearer seems to be kind of frozen in place. He's not moving. I don't think he's dead, necessarily. He isn't even necessarily possessed or seized or anything like that. I think he's just simply frozen in time. And that's a concept which recurs throughout this video. We will see it time and again, this idea of being frozen in time. And I very much think that's what's going on here. The implications of that, of certain moments in this video being frozen in time, I'm not quite sure of yet. And perhaps I'll do a longer video on that specifically later. But I think it is quite clear and quite interesting that that is the case throughout many parts of this video. And if he is just kind of frozen sitting here, what implication does that have for the rest of the video and who the torchbearer is throughout the rest of the video? 1 second later, we have quite an obvious one here. A reference to migraine, thunderstorms, cloud snow, and a slight drizzle. And also just interesting imagery and kind of place setting for this underworld realm. Now I say underworld because it seems to have that kind of implication of being in darkness, confined underground somewhere. It could be a parallel universe, an other realm kind of thing. I don't know that it's necessarily supposed to be physically located under the ground in Dima. But it is interesting to see these blue-toned storm clouds throughout the video, but not in every moment or every shot. And I talk about this a bit more in a video I published recently, just focusing exclusively on the snow in this video. But I think there is an element to which this video perhaps takes place in 2 separate locations simultaneously, which again, is not something that would be new for one of these lore videos. We see that in Jumpsuit, for instance, just as a one reference point. Certainly here, if that is happening, it's happening in a much more subtle fashion, but nonetheless, it's not an impossibility that it's still happening here. This might be a bit of a stretch, but I've been wondering if this is supposed to represent a silver-weighted sun. As I highlighted at the beginning, we see that shot with the torchbearer and the light coming on behind him, and it's above them throughout the video. So it's positioned where a sun would be positioned, but it's quite silver and it's huge, as something heavy or weighted would be. So is that supposed to be a callback to Silver-Weighted Sun? Perhaps. From my recollection, Silver-Weighted Sun was supposed to be an alternate title for Overcompensate, and perhaps had some alternate lyrics, but didn't look like it was a completely finished song off of the album, or something that would perhaps be on Breach, like Dragpath, for instance, might be. But it is still something which we see mentioned and not really fully explained, and perhaps this is what it was supposed to be referring to. As we go through this video, there are a number of other places where I see direct links or references or parallels between this video and the Digital Remains booklet, which makes me think they at least had some concepts in mind for this video when they put that booklet together, even if they only filmed this more recently while they were in England, in Manchester, I believe, on the Clancy tour. I would also be very curious to know when exactly this song was written in relation to the rest of Clancy. Was the entirety of Breach, or most of Breach, written alongside Clancy? Here we see Josh fading away, slipping away, as a hallucination, right when Clancy sings those lines, my hallucination. Obviously, this can be clearly seen to relate to something like Navigating, or My Blood, or the Scaled and Icy era as a whole, in which Josh is a hallucination, which Clancy sees. Now, does that mean that the Torchbearer is a hallucination all the way throughout this entire lore? Probably not. But I'm not sure we can fully rule that out. However, there is a clear distinction which was drawn in Navigating between the Torchbearer dressed the way he is here and the Torchbearer dressed as a bandito the way he is in Paladin Strait. That was very much supposed to be highlighted as the real Torchbearer, and the other one who's dressed more like this, who accompanies him from the outside onwards up until Navigating, is supposed to be the hallucination. Here, as Josh plays the drums, we see him switching between actually playing and seeming to be frozen in time again, referencing back to that moment towards the beginning of the video that I highlighted a moment ago, and once again, bringing in this idea of being frozen in time. This moment here, I know I'm not the first to mention this or make this connection, but it is quite an interesting one, that Tyler is throwing up his microphone into the air, and as he does so, the cord creates something in the shape of a noose. To me, that harkens back to that line from Holding On To You. It isn't a noose, it's a leash, and I have news for you, you must obey me. So is perhaps the symbolism here that Tyler, through the use of music, is able to tie a leash around his mind and control it by playing and writing songs. Now, this moment here, this particular shot, very much reminds me of page 17 on the digital remains, and a couple of the other pages as well have a similar kind of concept going on, but with a number of him repeated again and again and again. By referencing back to the digital remains makes me wonder if they had a concept for this video in mind, even as they were putting Clancy together. In a very similar shot, we once again see Tyler playing the guitar, which I'm not sure we've seen in a music video since the Scaled on Icy era, and more specifically, since the music video for Shy Away. We did see it in the live stream performance, obviously, but that wasn't an officially released music video in the same way. And I don't think in either of the videos which they did release from the live stream performance, Shy Away and Heathen's Trees, he was playing a guitar in either of those. So it is interesting to see that once again as we're coming into this era. And certainly if he continues to play guitar lines which are as good as the one in the contract, I hope he will continue to do that throughout the rest of Breach. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't any guitar on Clancy. I'm not enough of a musician or a music expert to know exactly what all the different sounds on that album were created by. But we certainly didn't see him explicitly playing it in the same way that we did here or in Shy Away. Now, this shot, it's a bit blurry here, but it once again reminds me of a page out of the digital remains. And it is also interesting to see how red he looks in this particular image. We do have red tones playing off of the blue throughout the entire video here, but throughout the entire video, the prominent color is blue. And yet in this shot, the prominent color very much is red. And again, his face is starting to distort a little bit. In this shot, we have snow flying up off of Josh's drum set, his cymbals, which again creates a direct parallel between this video and Fairly Local with all the snow coming off of the drums in that one as well. I made a whole video recently, as I mentioned, talking about the snow, and as part of that, I also brought in Fairly Local, so I won't belabor the point here with that reference and the connection between those two videos, but I do think it's an important connection, obviously, and I think it is one that's interesting to point out. Here in this image, we see these fragments flying upwards, back towards the sky, back towards what they've been shattered from, perhaps? Are they moving backwards in time as he moves forward? With the idea of having a freeze frame, as we'll see even more explicitly in a moment here, the question keeps coming to my mind, are there different timelines at play in this video? Are some elements moving backwards in time while some are moving forward? Or perhaps is Clancy able to operate outside of or moving against time, or operating in spite of how time is flowing? But certainly everything seems to be converging upward, and as we see here, this doesn't quite look like snow. It looks like the fragments are particles of something which has been shattered. So is it all moving back towards what it was broken from and kind of assembling all together? For some reason, this shot has always felt really familiar to me, and I haven't quite yet been able to place why. Certainly it is reminiscent of that line from Shy Away, Manifest a Ceiling, and also that image in the digital remains where we see trees reflected in the water. Why is it so familiar? Perhaps one of you will know what I'm thinking of, or perhaps it simply is my imagination linking back to something else from something completely distinct and separate from 21 Pilots. Here, as Tyler throws his mic through the air, we see it falling and spreading out, sort of slowed down, in a way that's very similar to the imagery used for Pet Cheetah. It's a song which is often, I think, forgotten because it's not necessarily many people's favorite song off of that album. And even Tyler himself has said it was just something he created to deal with and get over writer's block, and then ended up including it on the album. I don't necessarily hate the song, although I do think it gets a bit repetitive at the end, but it is interesting that they are referencing back to a very similar piece of imagery here as we saw with that song, Pet Cheetah. This shot here, again, I'm not the first to make the connection, but it is pretty clear that he's kind of either creating the Clancy mask on his face or referencing back to the kind of visage of the bishops of Dima, where they have whiter paint on the top and then black paint over their nose and mouth and going down into their neck and hands. Is he channeling his inner bishopness here? Is he telling us that he is about to become a bishop? Perhaps. Also reminiscent of page, I think, 34 in the digital remains. And here we have that shot where he freezes time, as he kept teasing and referencing to. He freezes time around him, but he himself is able to move within it despite of the frozen time. And here we can see quite clearly that this is not snow. These are fragments of something. They look like pieces of stone, perhaps. But then again, at the end of the video, we do see him and the torchbearers start to disintegrate and evaporate into various fragments. So it could be pieces of previous people who have been here before and themselves evaporated and turned into these fragments in the past. But I think what is most significant and interesting about this shot is the fact that he's able to freeze time, which either means Clancy has some ability and power to freeze time in general, or that when he's operating within this other realm, he has a level of control over it. He's the champion of a world you can't see, and perhaps this is that world which he's referencing to. Maybe. Just a random thought, and it's a bit of a stretch, but this is also very reminiscent of that line from Migraine, freeze frame. Please let me paint a mental picture portrait, I believe is how it goes. It's not the first reference to Migraine that we've seen in this video. Obviously, we saw thunderstorms, cloud, snow, and a slight drizzle at the beginning. So perhaps this is the lost music video for Migraine. I'm kidding, but it is interesting to see how similar the lyrics of that song are to the video here, and how much of the lore that we've seen can be tied back to Migraine. We saw the Violent Island, Foldsoy, as well, and I'm sure many other things that I haven't mentioned or remembered. Here we see the glowing-eyed figures flying upwards towards a whirlpool in the clouds, in the sky, which is quite an interesting image. Now, to me, this seems to indicate that they are being freed from this other world, being sent upwards at last, now that Clancy is down here. That's always been my interpretation since I first watched the video. Certainly the light has always been placed above them throughout the video, and now they're flying upwards towards that light above. Again, this is a bit of a stretch, but perhaps there is a spaceship in the sky, which is pulling all the elements of this world up towards it, into it, freeing them or putting them back in their place so they can start again another day. This is one of the best shots in the video, in my opinion, and also you can see that Tyler is surrounded by these red leaves or red petals, perhaps from rebel red carnations. This shot again makes me think of a spaceship in the sky pulling everything upwards towards it, that bright light, you know, as you see in all those UFO images and things like that. Again, probably a stretch, but regardless of whether or not that's what's supposed to be actually happening here in the video, it's not impossible that they were aware of that line and had it in mind when they created some of this imagery as well. Then, of course, here we have a reference to the song off of their self-titled album, Fall Away, as his skin starts to break up and fall apart and fall off him in this image here, until by the end of the video, he completely evaporates and disintegrates. So those were just some key moments throughout the video that I thought were important to highlight and had important references and parallels within them to other things that we've seen before. The video as a whole is reminiscent of these lines from a song off of Vessel, The Run and Go. Cold nights under siege from accusations, cerebral thunder, and one-way conversations. He's under siege from accusations because not only are we as a fan base theorizing that he could be becoming a bishop of Dima and turning evil in a sense, but also the torchbearer in a letter to Clancy during the tour seems to also be accusing him of a similar thing, and perhaps the banditos themselves are. It's cold, we've seen snow falling all around them, there's cerebral thunder in the sky, and the song appears to be a conversation which he is having with himself, a one-way conversation, which Clancy is having with himself. And then we also have that line on Trap Door, everyone gather around for a show, watch as this man disappears as we know. So we can see him here putting on a show for the glowing eyes, singing a song for them to sing along or play along to, and also disappearing at the end of the video, quite literally. So once again, the song Trapdoor has a very clear and direct tie-in to the story at this point. We saw that a lot throughout Clancy, or at least theorized that we could see that a lot throughout Clancy, so it's quite interesting to see that again with Breach. With that being said, that was everything which I thought was important to highlight in terms of references and clues and things like that. If you think there's anything I missed here or connections that were mistakenly made and really refer to something else entirely, let me know in the comments, and as always, don't forget to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews.